Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. In a galaxy where battles decide the fate of empires, can one man's courage shift the balance of power? Let's get into the story. In a galaxy teeming with ambition, where star systems were prizes and conquest a common language, the galactic colosseum stood as a unique anomaly. Built by mankind, this marvel of engineering drew its inspiration from their bloody past, the arenas of ancient Rome. It wasn't a place of mere entertainment, but a reflection of the cold, pragmatic reality of interstellar politics. Here, galactic races settled their feuds with blood and steel, not with armadas and planetary bombardment. One champion from each side would meet under the harsh lights, their life and death determining the course of empires. This brutal system preserved a precarious balance amongst the stars. Wars were fought in microcosm, their devastation contained within the Colosseum's towering walls. Humanity, veterans in this grand theater of combat, had become a dominant force, their champions earning both renown and fear across the galaxy. None dared defy their supremacy for centuries, until the Voltrix decided to tempt fate. These hulking conquerors, their bodies massive testaments to strength and aggression, mistook humanity's adherence to the Colosseum's dictates as weakness. They coveted the Orpheus system, a jewel of resources nestled at the edge of known space, and believed a quick duel was all that stood between them and their prize. The Voltrix fielded their most monstrous warrior, a creature of titanic proportions, its battle lust emanating in palpable waves that sent shivers down the spines of alien delegations. Earth, they concluded, would crumble before the champion's might, ushering in an age of Voltrix dominion. How tragically, fatefully wrong they were. Earth, cradle of humanity, was a world in turmoil. The audacity of the Voltrix challenge sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of power. Losing the Orpheus system wasn't just a matter of resources or strategic positioning. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity's reign over the Colosseum remained unchallenged. The problem lay in their tradition. The best human warriors, the true masters of single combat, were reserved for the gladiatorial spectacles of the Colosseum. There, before an audience of trillions, champions honed their skills and battled for personal glory, becoming legends whispered amongst the stars. Sending such a seasoned veteran to duel an unknown alien, a creature likely bred and augmented specifically for this fight, held immense risk. A defeat would shatter Earth's image of invincibility, both in the halls of power and on the galactic stage. It was a predicament none foresaw, yet Earth had few options. Time was of the essence, and they were running short. Eyes scoured the ranks, searching for a champion, and finally landed on an unremarkable backwater colony. There, on a planet of dust storms and hardship, lived a forgotten soldier, Tomicius. His dossier was riddled with cliches, battle-hardened, loyal, efficient. What it did not reflect was the glint in his eyes, a predator's gaze honed over a lifetime of skirmishes, a pushing back against relentless odds. Tomicius was far from the perfect specimen of human physiology, not a genetically enhanced athlete nor a product of some elite training program. He was a man tempered in the fires of frontier conflicts, carrying his scars and his lessons in the lines etched on his face. He was not their first choice. He might not have even been their fifth. But with the fate of the Orpheus system hanging in the balance, Earth took a desperate gamble. Tomicius, bewildered and yet fiercely proud, found himself aboard a sleek transport hurtling towards the heart of the galaxy. His destination was the Grand Colosseum, where he would stand before a judging universe, a lone human against a monstrous champion, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire world on his shoulders. The Voltrix envoy reveled in their smug arrogance. They perched in their delegation suite, luxurious and strategically positioned to overlook the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. The human-designed arena of ritualized bloodshed was where the galaxy would witness the Voltrix rise to dominance. Kragnor, their champion, rumbled impatiently in an adjacent chamber, a monstrous figure of bulging muscle and a gleaming carapace, each limb the size of a human torso. His roars echoed throughout the suite, a primal sound that vibrated through the Voltrix elders' very bones. He was their ultimate weapon, augmented with the finest Voltrix biotech, his already formidable physique honed into an engine of pure annihilation. They watched through the suite's expansive screens as the meager human delegation entered the arena, A handful of dignitaries, their faces etched with tension, were led onto the sand. Then came their opponent, and a rumble of confusion swept through the Voltrix envoy. This Tomicius was nothing special. No towering physique, no cybernetic enhancements, no outlandish armor, just a plain combat suit clinging to an average human frame. Was this some cruel joke? A final act of defiance from a broken people? But then the Voltrix caught the glint in Tomicius's eyes. A cold, calculating gleam behind the weathered features. This wasn't a desperate man awaiting slaughter, but a warrior sizing up his territory, searching for angles and weaknesses. This human was dangerous, but in a way they couldn't fully comprehend, a way that gnawed at their overconfidence. From the stands, a roar erupted that shook the Colosseum to its core. The spectacle, the audacity of the uneven match. This was what the galactic audience craved. David facing Goliath, the underdog with the potential to bring down a giant. The Voltrix envoy shifted uncomfortably. Had they underestimated these humans? Fallen prey to their own arrogance? The question hung unanswered as Kragnor was released into the arena, the ground trembling beneath his colossal weight. He raised a clawed fist towards the human and, in a voice that boomed across the entire Colosseum, issued his species' traditional challenge. Tomicius didn't flinch. His eyes never wavered from the lumbering behemoth, and a strange smile played on his lips. Was it fear? Madness? Or something else entirely? The translator's flat rendering of Tomicius's reply crackled over the Colosseum's immense speaker systems. He didn't issue a challenge, not in any grand tradition the crowd expected. Instead, he spoke in plain English, his voice carrying a casual dismissal that sent shivers through the audience. "All right, you oversized beetle. Let's dance." Confusion surged like waves across the Colosseum. It wasn't the arrogance that stunned the crowd, rather it was the utter lack of it. The Voltrix envoy erupted in outrage. How dare this puny human insult their champion, their species, with such flippancy? Kragnor, though unable to decipher the words, was no stranger to a foe's disdain. An ear-splitting bellow signaled his fury, and he charged, the ground trembling beneath the force of his assault. His intent was clear, to pulverize the human in the opening seconds, a brutal demonstration of power to establish dominance. Tomicius, however, didn't flinch. His lack of fear, or perhaps even his disregard for it, sent a ripple of unease through the audience. His stance was loose, a paradoxical blend of relaxation and readiness. The crowd held its collective breath. Was this man insane, or was something else lurking beneath that unremarkable exterior? Just as the Voltrix Titan closed in, jaws agape and claws outstretched to tear the human apart, Tomicius moved. He sidestepped the charge with an ease that drew a gasp from the stands, a dancer's grace, not a soldier's brute strength. With that same fluid motion, he dipped beneath the Voltrix's scything claw, pivoted, and propelled himself upwards. The Colosseum exploded as one. No human should be that fast, that agile. With a move that seemed to defy physics, Tomicius landed squarely on Kragnor's armored back, his weight a mere annoyance against the immense creature. The Voltrix champion stumbled, its colossal limbs flailing wildly to dislodge this unexpected rider. The crowd's roar intensified, a mix of disbelief, excitement, and a primal thrill. Kragnor roared, confusion mixing with panic, his voice booming across the arena. This fight was far from what he trained for, anticipated, even understood. The elders in the Voltrix suite paled. Their ultimate weapon, their champion, was suddenly, inexplicably on the defensive. The duel, and perhaps the fate of the two races, had taken a drastic, unthinkable turn. Tomicius had no illusions about winning with strength alone. The Voltrix champion was a mountain of muscle and chitin against his human frame. But even mountains had fault lines, weaknesses he could exploit. Years spent fighting on the fringes of colonized space taught him one brutal truth. Size was rarely synonymous with agility. He dug his fingers into the chinks of Kragnor's thick carapace, finding rough handholds on the creature's back, then began a calculated ascent. Every lunge, every clumsy attempt to buck him off was used to Tomicius's advantage. His body contorting in ways that seemed to defy anatomy, his eyes sharp and focused, scanned the massive creature for its inevitable blind spots. The Voltrix champion was trapped in a disorienting game of predator and prey. only he was ill-suited to be either. The crowd, used to the predictable power tactics of Voltrix warriors, watched in mesmerized awe as the human seemed to vanish and reappear at will atop the creature's back. Tomicius, utilizing Kragnor's own frantic momentum, scaled the hulking form until he reached the vulnerable point, unseen to the flailing monster, where the carapace met thick, corded muscle. It was a junction point, a neural nexus controlling movement in the giant limbs. There, Tomicius unsheathed the wickedly curved blade, part of his standard kit, designed with resilience in mind. It was never meant for slaying titans, yet driven by Tomicius's knowledge of anatomy, of pressure points honed via countless battles across dusty outposts, the blade sank home. It didn't pierce the thick armor, but it did something far more devastating. It severed a vital nerve cluster. An agonized screech, alien and terrifying, shattered the air. The entire colosseum seemed to flinch at the sound. Kragnor's movements became uncoordinated, spasms rippling through the immense body. This human, this insignificant insect, was crippling their monstrous champion with the most basic of weapons. The Voltrix elders watched, faces draining of color, their triumphant roars choked in their throats. With one audacious move, this tiny human had turned their champion's strength into a chaotic liability. The crowd was on its feet now, a thunderous, deafening roar echoing through the Colosseum. It wasn't just about the spectacle of the fight, but about its sheer unpredictability. The unthinkable was happening. The human, this human, was not merely surviving, but dictating the flow of the battle. Every alien delegation, every seasoned politician and warlord felt a cold chill slither down their spines. For if a single human was capable of this, what could an organized force of them do? This wasn't just about the Orpheus system. This was about the very balance of power in the galaxy. The sudden paralysis in Kragnor's arm gave Tomicius the opening he needed. With a single, powerful surge, he sprang free of the creature's back, landing with uncanny precision amidst the swirling sand. The crowd's roar swelled, shaking the very foundations of the arena. The Voltrix champion, confused and writhing in pain, stumbled and thrashed, attempting to regain control of its own limbs. For a creature accustomed to overwhelming its prey with sheer physicality, this sudden helplessness was devastating. Tomicius didn't hesitate. He moved with a seasoned veteran's efficiency, eyes assessing the situation swiftly. He wasn't built for protracted battles against creatures of Kragnor's sheer size. He needed to end this, and end it quickly. He feigned drawing the Voltrix's attention towards an injured limb as he circled his monstrous opponent. Kragnor, with his warrior's instincts still partially intact, reacted predictably, shifting its immense weight to protect the vulnerable area. This opened another vital gap, exposing a more vulnerable joint, and Tomicius struck like a viper. His blade found its mark again, slicing not with brute force but with surgical precision, aiming for the tendons and muscle fibers that controlled the immense leg. With a sound like tearing fabric, the limb buckled, and the mighty Kragnor crashed to its knees in the blood-soaked sand. A collective gasp swept through the arena, followed by a silence so profound it seemed to hang heavy in the air itself. The Voltrix envoys stared, mouths agape, the color draining from their faces. Their prized champion, the embodiment of their species' martial might, was broken before their very eyes. Tomicius circled his downed opponent carefully, his blade still drawn but held low. The battle wasn't over, not yet. He knew cornered warriors, even giants, were capable of desperate, unpredictable acts. The crowd, sensing the turning tide, held its breath, unsure whether to celebrate or await a sudden, brutal twist. The tension was almost unbearable. Kragnor, despite the pain and growing terror, was far from defeated. His species had honed instincts into the brutal art of survival. His eyes, bloodshot and maddened, darted around the arena, then settled on Tomicius, a flicker of recognition replacing their initial confusion. This wasn't a warrior from the Colosseum's spectacle fights. This was a killer honed on real battlefields. His movements as unpredictable yet lethal as an unstable fusion core. He roared, a final defiance fueled by desperation, and lunged at Tomicius. The crowd gasped in collective horror as those immense clawed arms swiped through the air, coming dangerously close to crushing the human beneath him. The force of the attack sent dust swirling and obscured vision momentarily. The Voltrix elders rose to their feet, hope rekindled. Perhaps a miracle could still be salvaged from this disaster. But when the dust settled, Tomicius was not a broken heap on the sand. He'd read Cragnor's desperation, anticipating the last wild lunge. He rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow, then twisted upwards into the creature's now exposed underbelly. With a surge of strength honed from years of combat, he plunged his blade upwards. A lethal thrust aimed not at an armored surface, but at the softer, pulsating flesh beneath. Cragnor let out a gurgling scream that echoed chillingly throughout the arena. The blade pierced deep into its abdomen, slicing through vital organs. For a few horrifying moments, the giant remained suspended in midair, its immense weight seeming to defy gravity. Then, with a shudder that convulsed its entire body, Cragnor collapsed to the side, its lifeblood mingling with the dust of the arena floor. Silence fell again, this time thick with the weight of what they'd just witnessed. The Voltrix delegation sat stunned, their eyes wide with shock, unable to comprehend the utter destruction of everything they believed in. The human, battered but standing, watched as his opponent thrashed its last, blood dripping from its mouth. He'd seen this final dance many times, the last flickers of dying nerves. He knew the battle was over. The crowd exploded in a cacophony of cheers, screams, and the rhythmic stomping of countless feet. The energy was electric, a tangible force that pulsated through the massive colosseum. It was far more than simple entertainment now. It was the shattering of preconceived notions, a brutal affirmation of why humanity remained the uncontested masters of this ancient arena. The human, Tomicius, stood amidst the storm, his blade still raised, his battered combat suit stained crimson. His eyes swept across the stands, taking in the pandemonium triggered by his desperate victory. He did not raise his arms in a conqueror's salute. Instead, wearily, he lowered his weapon and stood there, a solitary figure amidst the roaring waves of alien dignitaries, ambassadors, and warriors. His expression was unreadable, a mix of grim satisfaction and exhaustion. In that moment, though, he was more than just a champion. He was a stark reminder to the galaxy that the human capacity for violence was not to be underestimated, a grim truth often forgotten in the political dances of the Colosseum. The Voltrix delegation, ashen-faced and broken, made their hasty departure from the arena. Their voices were silenced, their arrogance stripped away. The Orpheus system was no longer theirs to claim, but that was merely a material loss. The far greater blow was to their pride, their image, their perceived place in the galactic order. The human's seemingly impossible victory echoed throughout the Colosseum, and from there it traveled on invisible waves across star systems, reaching the ears of potential challengers and allies alike. Earth had spoken in the oldest language of all, the language of war, and their message was clear. Humanity's dominance would not be challenged without brutal consequence. Tomicius, oblivious to the far-reaching consequences of his duel, finally sheathed his blade. The crowd still chanted his name, but it sounded distant in his battle-weary ears. His legs wobbled as he turned away, his duty done. He had won, survived. But as he left the blood-soaked sands behind him, there was no glory etched on his face, no triumphant grin. There was only a weary determination, the burden of a warrior who knew victory and defeat were merely two sides of the same tarnished, brutal coin. The news traveled at warp speed, relayed from the Colosseum across the neural networks of 1,000 worlds. Earth's victory was dissected, discussed, and analyzed with a mixture of fascination and fear. Tomicius's name, though initially mispronounced and garbled in translation, became recognizable among political elites and backwater mercenaries alike. The image of the unremarkable human besting a titanic Voltrix warrior became burned into the galactic consciousness. On Earth, Tomicius found himself a reluctant hero. He was paraded before dignitaries, lauded for his bravery, offered vast riches and cushy positions of power. But the old warrior wanted none of it. In the quiet solitude of his dusty home planet, the cheers and the speeches seemed like echoes from another life. He went about his days as he always did, with a grim silence hanging over him. The battle had changed him, hollowed out something vital within him. There was a haunted look in his eyes, the ghost of Kragnor and countless other nameless enemies haunting his dreams. Yet the echoes of that day in the Colosseum reverberated long after Tomicius had faded into obscurity. The Voltrix, humbled and shamed, retreated to their territory, their expansionist ambitions temporarily halted. They scrutinized their warriors, demanding greater power, hardening their defenses, and, in the deepest recesses of their military compounds, there grew a chilling ambition to mold a creature that could overcome not merely a single human, but the tactical genius and ruthlessness that Tomicius embodied. In a galaxy filled with countless alien races, Earth's bloody reputation was cemented further. Challenges for territory grew less frequent. Veiled threats turned into grudging respect. Tomicius had not brought peace, rather he brought a sliver of wary quietude, a temporary respite won with blood and determination. And so the great galactic Colosseum continued to thrive. Battles were won and lost, legends born and forgotten. Empires shifted in dominance because of what transpired within its ancient walls. But always, somewhere in the stands, there were whispers about the day the Voltrix brought their monstrous champion. The day a lone human turned the tide, proving once again that even the most formidable beasts could fall to the relentless onslaught of a seasoned human warrior.